everyone. Welcome to Author Chat. I'm Terry, a contemporary romance novelist, and I'm here today to talk books and craft with Michele, also a romance novelist. She has 8 books. Is that right, Mia?
8 books, although one's a trilogy, so we can't always count those as one.
Oh, you count the Hosts and Hellions trilogy?
Yeah, I think just because those books are all meant to be read together, that while they were standalones at one time, I tend to sell them now just as a trio.
Oh, okay. And then you had the how do you pronounce? I'm going to pronounce that Aegean Affairs series.
Aegean Affairs. Mm-hmm.
Right.
So that is 8 books altogether, although we're only up to book 3.
Okay, so more are planned in that series.
Mm-hmm.
And Hosts and Hellions.
Yeah, Hosts and Hellions is done. The Club has 1 out, but there are 2 more coming in that one. And then Vale's a standalone. And Faultline out in the spring will also be a standalone.
Right, so Vale is your newest one. And that one is more of a dystopian romance, I've heard. Is that right? Dystopian?
It is. Mm-hmm, yeah, it's dystopian.
And is there some paranormal to that too, right? Because the dude is like really old.
Yeah, so the main character in that is immortal, and it deals with the different classes of people, 2 of which are immortal classes. So that would definitely have some paranormal aspects to it.
Okay, and just tell us a little bit more about that story.
So Vale tells the story of Alexander Vale, and he's 1,000 years old. It takes place in what is the United States, but instead of thinking of it as we see the U.S., breaking it into 3 parts. You have the Northeastern Dominion, the Southern Dominion, and the Western Dominion. So Alex is the commissioner of the Northeastern Dominion. For a visual, just think Boston area is kind of where that's situated. And it's made up of a city and a bunch of surrounding villages. And he is the second in command of this entire area or dominion. Hundreds of years ago, there were these battles, these crusades, where the immortals practically wiped out the human class, which are called the Esnaves. And as this happened, the immortals rose to power. So you have these 2 classes of immortals, the subalterns, which are those newly turned immortals, and then the archontes, who are the ruling class. So the story opens with Alex in the middle of a committee meeting, an intelligence committee meeting, where they're trying to figure out these rebels and how they're creating strongholds to try and fight back. And Alex views himself as this very law-abiding, just person. And as the story progresses, he has to start recognizing where the ideal of who he is differs from his actual reality. And he does this through the romance aspect. So he meets an Esne woman, and through their interactions back and forth, he comes to see himself for who he is. And the story culminates with his battle against his ego and his soul, that eternal self. Which one's going to win? What choices is he going to make? Is he going to fight for the greater good like he always thought he would? Or at the end of the day, is it really this perception of what is good that he's maintained for 1,000 years?
Oh, that sounds really good. I actually do have it on my Kindle. I have not gotten into it yet, but it's there. Of course, I'll might have to move that up in my TBR list. I haven't really read much dystopian, but that definitely piques my interest. It's definitely it sounds like a deep, story, which I don't expect nothing, less from you. I think most of your stories do deal in themes of, good and evil and overcoming, odds and change, and just, very well done stories for the most part.
Oh, thank you.
And you're up next, like you said, is Faultline. That's out in March, right? Is it still out in March? About
end of March.
Okay. And that's more of from what I saw on that one, is more of a spicy romantic suspense. Is that right?
So that one falls into the erotic mafia romance category, which I have to say 10 years ago, I never thought we were going to have an erotic mafia romance category ever. But I like to say that it is the love child of The Godfather and the Crossfire series. If you put those two together, then you'd end up with Faultline. But because I'm me and I can't just write an erotic romance novel, I wanted my characters to be people. And so you have these two characters, you know, this very stunted almost female protagonist who her father was killed when she was 22, and her life just kind of stops there. So in so many ways, even though she's 32 years old, she's very emotionally immature. You know, there's this drive to just find out who killed her father and make this person pay. And then you have Giovanni, who is very much in control of himself. You know, he is the one who sets the rules for the table. Like, he's got it going on. Very, very hardcore, reads people, outstanding mentalist and narcissist. And he sees himself as being, you know, not just the top of the food chain, but being an outstanding example of what it means to be good at what you do. And so the two of these characters kind of come together, and as they're figuring out who the other one is, also have to figure out who they are. So the, you know, the erotic trope kind of factors into the story, and it moves the story along, and without it, the story would be lacking. But it really uses more the power and the mental aspects of BDSM than it does just let's write a sex book and call it a day. But it's massive. I just finished around, I just finished going through it because I had to do some work on it, and it's at like 277,000 words. I thought Vale was huge. This is 192,000 words. And I'm like, this sucker is huge. And then the, you know, Faultline, I'm like, oh my God, like, why don't I just beat a child with it? It is massive. Yeah, it's funny. So, two of my kids were very premature, and the one weighed 2 pounds 4 ounces. This book weighs 2 pounds 6 ounces.
So that weighs like, more than, yeah.
This is a baby. Yeah, it was just, it's insane. It's insane to think about.
So when in writing, say, like, you know, not all of your stories are overly spicy. I mean, you have some spice, but not all of them are. So how do you decide in the writing how much heat you're going to give a particular story?
So it sounds crazy, and I recognize they make medication for this, but these characters are in my head, so I don't pick it. They tell me what they're doing. So Aegean Affairs is actually a sweetheart romance style. So there's sex in it, but it's all very gently written, a lot of euphemism. They're also much shorter books. I think Amnesty, which is the first one, is somewhere in the 55,000 word category. So they're much, much shorter books. But those characters that's how they told their story to me. And that entire series has progressed in that way. So the second book, while I think it had a little bit more to it, still very much on the sweetheart scale. I was working on book 3 of that. So sweetheart romance, not a lot going on in the bedroom department. And actually, these two characters weren't giving me a lot to go on at all in the bedroom department, because the story surrounds the female protagonist. She finds out her husband's cheating on her. And it became this very difficult story to write. So every time I came into the office, I get up really early in the morning and write. By the time my husband came in, I was always just grumpy and angry and frustrated. And he's like, what are you working on that makes you so miserable? You know, maybe you shouldn't be writing. And I'm like, no, they won't shut up. I can't stop writing. But I was really, really miserable between my hero and my heroine. It was painful to watch and painful to write. So I sat down one day and I'm like, please, is there anyone else up here? Anybody who wants to talk? I don't care what story you have to tell. I will write it. Just give me a break from these people. And Giovanni starts talking and I'm like, oh, okay. All right. Well, and I had written this very, very loose idea of like having a mafioso as a main character, but I mean, there was no story driven to it. I knew that the female main character, that her father was an agent and that, you know, she would have an FBI background, but I didn't really have a story, didn't know where it was going. back in like 2012, 2013. So it's sitting on my computer in the work in progress pile. And I'm like, all right, well, we'll see what we got. And I'm not joking, in a month, the base of the story was done. Every single day, they started talking, they didn't stop, and I was able to bang out, I want to say at the time it was like 280, 285 in a month. And then it started that process of weeding it down and, you know, trying to make sure the sentences made sense, because it was just word vomit at that point. And I thought, when I got to 280, I'm like, I'll send this over to some beta readers and see, because I mean, you never know if it's going to resonate. You never know if you've hit a story that has that start and that finish. So I sent it out, and I was really shocked by the responses. They were really positive. Giovanni presents in the first half as an asshole. Sorry, can I curse?
Sure.
He's a really awful character because it's told in a split point of view. So the prologue and the first 16 chapters are all the female's point of view. And when you meet Giovanni, he's awful. He's absolutely awful. And I'm like, is anyone going to keep turning the pages? This guy is such a piece of work. But then you get to 17 and the entire story flips to his perspective, and you see what he was doing in those first chapters. And at that point, every beta reader said, I fell in love with him. Like, most of them were like, here are my panties midway through part one. Because, I mean, asshole or not, we all love a good alpha hole. And, but by 17, 18, they changed their tunes. And I'm like, all right, okay, maybe this really has a shot of going somewhere.
So do you consider yourself a plotter or a pantser?
I consider myself a compulsive, crazy person. I definitely don't plot out. I know writers that sit and they have the notebook and they write down everything and there's like a plan, and that's not me. But I think part of that comes because I don't feel like I'm writing characters. I feel like I am translating the stories. That when I've finished up with I'm getting to the end of the edits on Faultline, and I already have like several works in progress that are going because I got voices speaking all the time. And I'm like, I'm good. I'm going to work on this one and this one because it's in order of who's the loudest. And all of a sudden it's like, hey, we got a story for you. And I'm joking with my husband, and I said, I'm talking to the voices in my head now. And I'm like, I don't even know your name. You're not getting time when I don't even know what your name is. And I don't like you based on what you've told me about yourself. And all of a sudden it's like, here's my name. Write me. So I think it'd be a lot easier if I were plotting stuff out. But I'm definitely a fly by the seat of the pants. And then, you know, you're sitting and you're like, wait, what? What did you say happened? Oh my goodness. And then you have to go back and add in a scene. So that's definitely more me.
Actually that's funny, because my next question is have you ever planned too many things for a scene, and how do you decide what to keep and what to cut?
So I don't plan them, but during the edit process, I think that it's almost like a movie, that there are things that as you're watching it, sometimes you're like, why is that in there? Like, it had nothing to do with the story overall. Like, I already knew this about the character, so why are you just filling up pages? And I think for the lighter books, the shorter ones, there's not a lot of cutting that goes on. I tend to feel like, oh, do I need to make up something to fill some more spot? Because this just seems too lightweight. Yeah. But for the bigger ones, I feel like I'm looking more at what can I cut out? What have I already said one way, and it's very clear, and it doesn't need to be said another way. So that scene's not going to add anything to the book overall. And some scenes, I think that you might look at them the first time and think, I don't need that because I've already explained X and Y. But there are scenes that really not just move the story, but move the character. Mm-hmm. And I'm big on character development. I don't like to read books where I don't feel like I know the characters well. So I try not to cut things that I think might influence the character arc, even if I feel like they've been told in the story already.
Yeah, I've had that too. I was, my first, 3 books were definitely a lot shorter and bare bones, and I had to go back and add. And then my last one that just came out, I'm sitting here and I'm like, I have to cut. I don't know when I became so wordy, but this last one just kept going and going. And I'm like, I have to stop this book because it's going. And I kept coming up with the ideas. The characters kept being like, what about this? What about this? And it's like, no, we have to stop. We're too far along now. This has to end. I have to get them to
really
their
hard.
happily. I have to get them to their happily ever after. It was time, and so I did have that. But I don't know when that happened to me because I had always been so bare bones with my writing that it shocked me when I'm writing just like paragraphs after paragraph, and it's crazy. So, but that's
when the characters talk.
yeah, when it happened, it happened. So, and what was been the hard? Well, I think you kind of already talked about the hardest scene for you to write. Was that the book where the affair happened, or is there another one?
I think overall, if I'm looking at the only time I ever really had to stop writing was Happily Ever After. Like that scene where you're talking about this wife and this mom who finds out, thinking that her marriage is fine. Like she knows they have problems, she knows there are issues, but the second that she sees that her husband's been having an affair with another woman, I mean, and she sees it, she finds his phone. And not only does she read these text messages, but the woman has sent photographs. So now she sees what her husband has been doing. I think, as a wife and a mom, that's a knife right through your heart. And it's something, not only can you possibly not recover from, you don't want to. You're just, if you love this person, you're crushed by this. It takes it out of you. And being the conduit for that and writing it was really killing me. As far as hard things to write, I'm a survivor of sexual assault, and one of my books deals with a survivor and going through her process of recovery and how she saved herself. It wasn't hard to write in the sense of I needed a break and I needed to stop. It was hard in the sense of knowing that I was putting myself on paper in so many ways. I think that as writers, we always put ourselves in our characters in some way. Like I joke that most of my characters cook, because I love to cook. So I want there to be some character that cooks. Doesn't always have to be the woman. In Faultline, Lexi doesn't cook. She actually doesn't know how, but Giovanni is a good cook. So, it doesn't have to be the female character who's my cook, but someone's cooking and it better be good. So I think we tend to put ourselves and the people that we love or the people we don't love in our books in some way. And for me, I think if I had to pick, those are two of the hardest. But also when you love a character, and I think we can agree there are always those characters that pick, that hit us. Alex Vale, I love him. He is a good person. Watching him break was one of the most difficult things to write and then reread. I mean, because you want better for them. You want them to make these good choices. And when you watch the bad ones, or you watch the repercussions of the bad ones, worse, you watch the character realize the repercussions of the bad ones. It is painful, absolutely painful. Giovanni is another one that, again, I like the bad boy, so he fits right into my, what I'd be looking for if I was at the bar on a Friday night. But watching him realize what he has done and who he is, man, it was rough. And it was great when the male beta readers came back and said, I had to stop. I needed to take a break because I looked and I saw me in some of these scenes and I needed to stop. One of them came back and told me he cried, that as he read through what made Giovanni into who he is and how that impacted his life, that even though it had nothing to do with the male beta at all in real life, watching that brought him to tears. And I don't think as a writer you can get better compliments than your readers telling you that they were touched by your characters, or that it made them see themselves in some way.
Yeah, that's probably the highest compliment we can get as writers, is to touch a reader and move them, emotionally, however it is that, you're meaning to during that scene. That's awesome. So how do you select the names for your characters?
Most of them tell me if they're a main character. The secondary characters I tend to have to go looking for. I usually put my kids somewhere. So I think at this point, all 8 of my kids' names have made an appearance somewhere. So I'm good.
Yeah.
Don't have to worry about sucking them in somewhere else. So I do try to do that just as a little fun thing. The main characters usually name themselves, and it's odd because sometimes I'm like, I don't really like that name, or I don't really like that spelling, or I've already had a character whose name was too similar. I really don't want to use this again, but they are who they are.
Yeah.
In Faultline, for my secondary characters, and this book takes place in Sicily and deals with a lot of Sicilian and Italians. My husband and I have this favorite restaurant, and I made sure to use all the names of all the staff. So when you're reading it and you're like, oh, where'd that name come from? It probably came from our favorite restaurant.
Well, that's a great place. I do, sprinkle in some names here and there myself as a shout out, and only people who recognize it when they see it. And I think that's kind of a fun thing to do.
It really is.
Yeah.
In Host and Hellions, I use all the names of the favorite local brewery that I go to. All of the names of their beers up until that point were put in that book. So if Weyerbacher beers, and you're reading Host and Hellions, and you're like, oh, there's a club named Heresy, and there's one named, or someone's called a Blithering Idiot, or there's a club called Blasphemy. Like, all of these are beers that Weyerbacher Brewing does, and so it was this little homage to them, because I drank a lot when I was writing that one, and I usually had a Heresy on tap while I was doing that one. But yeah, and then some of them, Faultline has a lot of songs in it, so there are worked into dialogue. There are titles of songs. Faultline is actually the name of a song. So I like to put little tiny things that I know are in there, and if you knew, you might go looking for them, but that wouldn't necessarily be out of place if you didn't know that they existed.
So I know you have several little people there at your house. What does your writing day look like? How do you juggle all that?
Not enough time.
Oh, well, no, there's never enough time. But...
So I usually am up by 5, and I'm really lucky. I have an office that's right off the bedroom. So I slip downstairs and get shout out to my mom, my 20-ounce pottery mug of really dark roast coffee. And I come up to the office and log myself in, and I'm usually working in here until like 8:30, 9 o'clock. During pandemic times, my husband's home, so we share the office, and we usually switch off around then, because that's when his workday starts. I homeschool, so I go down, and I did before the pandemic, so I'm a 7-year crazy of this system, and props to everybody who had to jump in not knowing what they were getting into, because it's a realm sometimes, man.
It's crazy.
So
yeah.
We do our homeschooling. I'm also, because I like to cook, I'm a from scratch cooker, so I try to fit in some housework. Don't tell anybody, but the bathrooms are usually dirty. I am a sucky housekeeper, and but I do cook from scratch, so I tend to prep my meals and all that jazz. And then after dinner is cleaned up, I usually come back in and I put in another couple of hours. And if there are interviews or things, promo stuff that has to happen during the day, I am really, really fortunate. My mother-in-law moved in with us a few years ago, and I could not do it without her. She is an outstanding support. I run. I'm a marathoner in my spare time, and she is always like, hey, why don't you go for a run? I'll do whatever. I'll make lunch, or I'll school the kids right now, or whatever. So that's really, really helpful. But if I have something going on, like tonight, I actually have an interview. And so after dinner is done, I'll come up and do some work. My husband's going to clean up, and then my mother-in-law is going to help put kids to bed. So it's a family affair sometimes. But yeah, it's a long day. I'm usually in bed by like 10:30, and then we get up and do it all over again the next morning.
I have the same sort of thing. I get up at 5 to write before, everyone else gets up and we have to start the day. And so I don't know how you do the second round after dinner. You have to be exhausted by that point because that's a long day. That's for sure.
It is. I'm usually listening to stuff, so I really struggle with my editor's a red pen kind of guy. He loves to mark stuff up and threaten me with baseball bats because apparently I have some isms that he doesn't care for. So before I send stuff over to him, I try to listen to it. So I have a text to talk software, and I will run the whatever manuscript I'm working on or article that I'm working on through that, and then I listen to it as I'm reading it, so that I can try and make the edits and corrections that my brain would initially pick up on a read through. I also do, I'm a mentor and I review for people. So my evenings tend to be that more than they are necessarily working on my own stuff, unless it's just like compulsive, oh my gosh, I've got to get this out and I didn't have time in the morning. So I tend to do a lot more of the reading for other people, sending over comments, having Zoom or like messenger type chats with folks about what they're working on and how things can be better. I'm actually a judge for a writing competition right now. And so a lot of my evening time is reading my required readings and making my notations and things like that.
Yeah, the listening trick is fantastic. I heard about that a couple of a year or so ago, and that changed my life on editing. Just being able to listen to it, things jump out that you would read right over. So that's a tip for anyone who's watching who doesn't know about that. You'll find all kinds of typos and missing. I'm big on missing the these in my first draft. Apparently I just skip right over the word the when I'm going really fast. So, and I'll be like listening and then they'll just skip and I'm like, oh crap, the right there. Okay. So that's
I think too with spell check, we often will just we assume spell check got it. And when you're listening to it, sometimes it can really help.
Yeah.
Because, for words I'm big on, I don't know how this happened, but than and them, when I'm typing, I must just make a fool out of myself a lot. And I don't pick it up till I hear it.
Yep.
And I'm like, oh my goodness, what was I thinking?
Yep. It's like, wait, that's not the right word. Where did that come from? So yeah, happens all the time. So, since you've been at this for a while, I know you, so I know that you basically, like me, have been a writer since, probably day one. You came out of the womb coming up with stories. So what are some of the common traps that new writers fall into that, hold them back?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was talking about this with somebody else the other day, and I think that there are a couple, and different aspects of it that pick up. I think a lot of us, the stories just want to be told and we want to tell them. And it can be really, really hard to self-edit. What we were talking about earlier, where we've already said it 3 different ways. Do we really need the 4th way? But you're so excited to tell the story that self-editing is hard. Mm-hmm. And it's really, really hard to take criticism, even when it's given in the gentlest way possible. My editor is definitely not a gentle person. He likes to send me his red pen stuff with his commentary. And I have a pretty thick skin. So I recognize he wants me to be the best writer I can be. He's not saying the things he's saying to be hurtful. But still, when you love a character or you love something that happened and the person's like, yeah, no, just take it out. It's not working. Yeah. That can be really, really hard because you almost feel like they're attacking you. So I think growing a thick skin and not saying that you shouldn't be hurt if someone trashes you, not saying that at all, but understanding that writing is work. It is a passion for those of us who do it. It is a compulsion for some of us. But at the end of the day, if you're putting it out there to sell a book, then you didn't just write for you. I think we all at our core are writing for us. We're writing to get those stories out. But I could do that and stick a pile over in my corner. I don't ever have to put those out for someone else to read. So if you were just writing for you, by all means, write and keep your pile. That's cool. I've got plenty of things that I wrote. There's actually 4 books underneath the filer over here that I swear I'm never putting out because they were written for me. They weren't written for anybody else. But if you are putting the work in to polish that bad boy and get it out, you're writing for your readers too. And not everyone's going to love it. There are going to be people who read it and are like, this book sucks. There are going to be people who read it and say, this is the story of my life. I need 8 copies. But You got to grow a thick skin. I've heard writers say they don't read reviews. I do, mostly because my husband likes to send them to me. I'm not sure why. He's real big. I'm like, oh, did you see you have one? No, but I didn't, because I don't go looking for them. But you apparently do. So, I mean, I think that if you find that reading reviews makes you feel bad about you, don't do it. Just stop, because it's not worth it. Why would you give someone that power to suck that happiness and that joy out of you? If they don't like it, they don't like it. Reading is subjective. I read at least 5 or 6 books a week that I don't like, you know, and I've not once gone back to the writer and been like, dude, your work sucks. Right. In my head, I'm like, I don't like this book. It isn't for me. That doesn't mean it's not for someone else. I do offer constructive criticism. So if there's something like sentence structure error, missing punctuation, dialogue that doesn't make sense, writers need to know that. And if you're reading for somebody, or you're reading something that's out there and you want to leave a comment that says, you know what, I read the story, and while it didn't speak to me, what I found most problematic was that there was missing punctuation. That's fair.
Right. And I think you can do, but you can do that by, you know, finding the author and emailing them. You don't have to call them out in a review or in a tweet or, you know, whatever. You don't have to tell the entire world about it. You can just quietly say, hey, I found this, just letting you know.
Yep. And I mean, what'd your mom always say? She always said, if you can't say something nice, don't say it. No one needs a nasty review. Right. If the book was that terrible and you need to give it a 1 star, put your 1 star and move on. But there's no reason to trash a writer. I think also in this keyboard warrior world that we live in, it's really, really easy to take something that someone said and decide you want to trash their work for it. There are jerks among us, no doubt. And you know, one of my friends always tells me when she sees certain things, it's basically a sign to her that I don't need to waste my time with this person. And I like that idea, because just move on. If you don't like them, move on. Don't buy their work. But there's really no need to sit there and say, like, I heard this writer said A, B, C, and D, so I'm going to go into every single one book and give them all 0-star ratings and write nasty reviews. Well, you didn't even read the book. You cannot like the person. Just move on. It's cool. Just scroll on, you know. So I would say, yeah, reviews tend to be something that I tell people, like, don't read them if they bother you. Let them roll off your back. You're not going to please everybody all the time. And then I think just pay. When you really love something and you're passionate about it and it drives you, you want to be successful. And it can be so easy to fall into the trap of like, hey, I'll write a review for your book and it's only $20. Because you're thinking, oh, it's only $20, right? But it's so easy to fall into that trap of getting yourself, you know, kind of sucked in by a snake oil salesman, and at the end of the day, feeling worse about yourself. So I really caution people against the whole vanity idea of, you know, paying for reviews, paying for spots. Now, yeah, there's going to be advertising, and these are businesses. Of course, you're going to pay for things like that. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about more the idea of, we've all gotten the emails that are like, I'm a book reviewer with 8,000 followers, and if you send me $60, I'll review your book. Well, I mean,
anytime you put out a book, you get that email. There's always somebody that will email you, or, you know, post to your, you know, if you post it on a social media, there's always then a post, oh, hey, I'll review it for, you know, whatever amount of money. It's like, no, I'm not doing that. That's not.
And I think it makes a lot of the bookstagrammers feel bad too, because they're reading and reviewing for nothing. You know, if they make money, it is because they are affiliated with something else, but they're not charging writers, especially indie writers, for book reviews. Right. You know, that's just part of the business. It's part of being out there.
Right. I mean, and there are the places where you send, you know, I've sent out e-copies, you know, to people, and they can review it. They could not review it. It's, you know, some do, some don't. And, you know, you don't have any control over what kind of review they give it. And I think the expectation is if you shell out some money for it, the reviewer cannot be unbiased at that point.
Right. Agreed.
All right. So back to you. What, how do you approach world building? So I know Vale has a lot of world building there in there. In there. Wow, I just tripped over my words.
I think for me, Vale is probably an outlier. And I don't read science fiction and fantasy. I do like dystopian. Margaret Atwood was one of my favorite writers. Yeah. But I've tried to read some sci-fi and some fantasy, and I am blown away by the way people can create these worlds. There's actually a series that my husband had introduced me to, because the main character has multiple personalities, and the character development was just so spot on, and it blew me away the way that these writers, because there were several, that were able to just create this world and seamlessly weave these characters into it. And that is not my gift at all. Aegean Affairs takes place in Greece, and so I'm kind of stuck with what I've got there, and it takes place in Ireland as well in two of the books. So I mean, you're kind of limited to what the world actually has to offer in books like that. Hosts and Hellions takes place in Cape Spear, which actually exists. It's in Nova Scotia, but there's nothing. The farthest point of the eastern coast, and there's this old World War II hatch there. So I was able to create this small town. But think about small towns. I think in our minds that they all kind of look the same way. So yeah. While I was able to create something, it was really based on fact. It was based on that small town America, small town Canada type thing. Vale really is the outlier, because it is Faultline's New York City and Sicily. So again, you've got these like two fairly well-known areas that you can create. Right. But Vale is because it is dystopian, and it's this world. It's our world, but it's not as we know it. I think what I tried to picture was the idea of, if progress had never happened the way that it did for us, if we didn't have this industrial age, what are the things that we might have come by more organically, but also the things that we would have left behind and we would have missed? So you have this world where there are cars, but most people don't drive, because the technology is there, but it's so expensive because there's been no way to mass market these things. Most of the villages don't have running water and electricity. They use wells and candles. Yet they have train lines that run on coal. So, I mean, there are all these pieces of like, what parts of technology and industrialization would we have had, but also what parts would we have lost because, people, the big deal was war, subjugating people. So it's interesting, they have databases that they can keep up with folks, because there's this outstanding internet type system, but yet no running water in some of these towns. So it's interesting where they pushed their work and their goals, and where they, what they kept to themselves, because the city has electricity, the city has running water, but it's a big deal. She sees a bathtub, and she's never seen a bathtub before. And rumor has it that the humans have access to hot showers in the city. But they, in the towns, they have creeks, or they have a basin where they can, boil water if they want it to be less than cold. So it's this interesting dynamic of what do we have and what did we kind of let lapse. But yeah, I don't think world building is really my strong suit. I think I kind of suck at that.
Yeah, I do this, all of mine is contemporary. So I'm with, I've made up the small town in my first series, which was based on actual East Tennessee towns, a number of them. And, but my last one is actually set in Nashville. So I kind of know a little bit about that, and don't have to think too hard about that. So
one of my works in progress is set in Nashville, and I have to say, writing it is so much fun. You and I were talking via email or via messaging earlier about a restaurant that we used to go to. And it was so awesome sitting down and just kind of like reliving those moments and putting it out on paper, because, I'm from Nashville. I miss it. Philadelphia is nice. New York City is nice, but it's not home the way that Nashville is. So being able to kind of take that and write it is always really nice to pull out those memories.
Yeah, well, and I haven't even been in that area that you were talking about in forever either. So it was a nice stroll down memory lane to to remember that and walking around down there. And it was, it's like, oh, I remember that. I don't even know if it's still over there. I don't think it is actually. So
Don't break my heart.
I know, sorry. So, in your opinion, what are the most important elements of good writing?
Oh, character development. And if I'm 100% honest, and please don't anyone flame me, I think the romance industry is really lacking in that. And I'm not saying it's bad. I think that books offer escape for folks a lot, and these dime store books that you pick up, and even things like the Gene Affair, 55,000 words. How much character development really are you going to get in 55,000 words? Not a whole lot. So I'm not even saying that I follow my own rules, but I love, love, love reading a good character. Somebody that I close my eyes and I see them, but also like that I believe they were walking down the street kind of character development. And I think that in the books that I look back and I say these are my favorites, that's a common element to all of them, is I think the characters are really, really well done. Put your reader there. I read a book recently for a friend, and she told me all this stuff that was going on, but then the characters never felt any of that. They didn't smell what was being cooked. They didn't talk about what they felt when they looked out the window and saw all the stuff that was going on. And to me, like that's something that we need to offer the readers. We can't just kind of give one or two sentences and expect them to be transported there. We need to transport them there. Whether that is because they connect so strongly with the characters that they see themselves as your main, your female protagonist or your male protagonist, or because they're just a voyeur watching everything unfold. You want them to be there. You want to make it, feel real when they're reading the words. Make it a movie in their head. Vale's an audiobook, and I was reading the narration or listening to the narration. And the one thing that struck me was when the narrator was reading, his voice was so perfect that I forgot I'd written the story. And I was waiting for what happened next. I mean, it was just like, that's what I want when I'm reading a book. I want to have to turn the page because I have no idea what's going to happen next, and I just need to know.
That is true. I agree with that. So for you, what does success look like?
Oh man, that's a hard one. I'll give the real answer, I guess, and then the truth. I think that most of us would say that success would be like being able to pay the mortgage. Like if I could do this all day and didn't need a patron to support me, like, wow, how cool is that? But at the end of the day, I'm able to write the amount that I write because my husband has a job that facilitates our family life. I know plenty of writers that they're struggling to find an hour because they have to work full time or work two jobs. I work in the home. I take care of my kids. I take care of my house. I homeschool. I'm not devaluing that at all. But the reason I'm able to give as much time as I do is because I'm not worried about keeping the lights on because his salary covers that. And, so he definitely, I sell books that, I can pay for memberships to museums, and I can pay to take my kids on field trips when the world isn't shut down. I remember the first time I was able to buy lunch when we went out. Now that's great and cool and fun. But I'm not paying, our monthly expenses with what I sell. So I think commercial success definitely looks like the ability to shoulder that burden, or at least some of that burden, on a more routine basis. But that being said, I also don't publish every year. I know people who put out 4 and 5 books a year, and props if you can get that stuff written, edited, and blown away, but that's not me. So partly because I'm writing monsters these days, and partly because it's just not the way that my process is. But I think when I look at what is success, like what makes me feel like I did it, is being able to type the words, the end, and knowing that the story was told. And there's no price tag on that, but that's for me. I feel successful when I feel like I was authentic with getting these characters out on paper. And at the end of the day, I listen to it, I read through it, and I have no regrets about how they're presented or how their story is told. That to me is the ultimate piece of success.
That's a good one.
But it doesn't pay the bills.
No, I know about that. So is there anything else that you're working on that you'd like to talk about?
So we've got a ton of works in progress, I guess, going. Although when they're going to get done is anybody's guess. Faultline is March, and as much as I just said I don't put out multiple books in a year, because I had several works in progress that have been going on for years. 2021 actually looks like a big year because book 3 of Aegean Affairs will be coming out, and if I'm really, really good, who knows if that's going to be true, there'll be another work in progress called Bring Me to Life, which is a story about, it's another vampire story, although it's more traditional vampire story. And it takes place in Maine, which is my favorite state. But then in addition to those pieces, the work in progress pile has the Gospel of Persephone, which is the one that takes place in Nashville. And that's a retelling of Persephone in Hades. My husband is of Greek descent, so mythologies and things like that are a big talking point here, and that story just really resonates. So I have that probably about 70% through a word vomit stage, but definitely has more to go. And then this new character pair that popped up in my head, I know I'm going to end up sitting and devoting time to them, and they're driving me nuts because they won't stop talking. But that's another mafia romance. I just don't like the main character. He just doesn't speak to me in a way that makes me like him yet. So that might be a couple of years in the making. I haven't figured out how he's going to redeem himself, and I can't write something where I really don't like him. It's a Russian mafia instead of a Sicilian one, and I know that my main female character is a baker, so props to her because I like food. But his family made money in human trafficking, and I'm just not sure how you can redeem that. So I do tend to write things that have minor subplots going on, and because I like to donate to charity. So Host and Hellions has a character who's on the autism spectrum. So every April, the sales of that book are donated to a local camp here that serves autistic children and adults. So things like that are really important to me. I like to write characters that have the real struggles and the real kind of character traits that we have. Martial Hearts dealt with pregnancy loss and rape. So this past October, the proceeds from that went to support bereavement work with parents who were in the process of losing pregnancies. So a lot of these real struggles, I like to take that and funnel some of those proceeds into those types of organizations. So I have a feeling that however this unnamed work in progress works out, I will be working at some point with a human trafficking organization to donate proceeds to that. That's the only way I think I probably could stomach writing a book like that, because that's an issue that really bothers me. But I don't create these characters; they create themselves. So we'll see where Nikolai's character goes. It might just go it might go into that pile of books that I wrote that are never going anywhere.
Where can readers find you?
Oh, why would you want to find me? No. So I know some bookstores carry, so that's always awesome and cool. Amazon and online retailers, always a big deal. I operate miamichele.com, where there is a bookstore, and you can also get autographed books there. But it links to both the electronic versions as well as the print versions. I do have Instagram. I am Mia Michele Author, and Facebook is Mia Michele Books. I'm also Mia Michele with one L. So there is a writer who came out a year or two after I did, who is also Mia Michele. She has two L's. We don't look alike. We are very, very different people, and we write different things, although we're both in the romance genre. So always one L if you're looking for me, and two L's if you're looking for her. I also do not design dog bags. Apparently there's a Mia Michele who designs dog bags. So all these things that happened like a few years after my website got up and rolling, and I'm like, wow, it's pretty cool when you Google your name and you're like, interesting. But yeah, you can definitely find me online, and I do respond to messages unless you're a creeper, and then I just hit delete. So please don't.
Yes. So I'll have all of Mia Michele's links down in the description. That'll be down here. and I'll make sure to spell it. While you're down in the description down there, go ahead and click the subscribe and the like, and I believe that bell thing should be over there somewhere, so you can get more author interviews and be entertained, and I can make some more of these. So anyway, thanks for watching, and thank you to Michele for volunteering to be my first guest on the Author Chat.